Thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you very much for the gracious introduction as well. It's a pleasure to be here, and an honor and somewhat, let's say, a humbling task to be here as the, 15 days after your great birth date, since I suppose the birth date starts when you really start teaching. So I'm very, very glad to have this opportunity. As Bhaskar kept nagging me to ask what I wanted to talk about, and I couldn't really decide, because I wanted to give you something which could do justice to the crossover idea, both in terms of the connecting different fields, giving you an idea of the interaction between the work and policies that's relevant here in India, something that would be of interest to a vast array of people coming with different backgrounds, and at the same time something that I was working on at the moment, so it was very fresh in my mind. So in the end, what decided me of all of the possible topics I could approach, what decided me was just what the paper I happened to be working on right that minute. And so maybe that was the wrong choice, but that's what it is. Just to give you a sense of what I'm always trying to juggle between the excitement in the research, which I'm going to try and convey, and also the importance of the political implication, policy implication of what I'm talking about. First of all, let me congratulate you on your birthday, so to speak, or your birth month. I think it's incredibly exciting that you guys are here, and I wish you all the best. I think this is a fantastic project, and I couldn't be more pleased to be ever so slightly associated with it to this too. So I'm going to be talking today about some work I've been doing with, in collaboration with co-authors who now are all over the US, Chicago, Harvard, and Yale, and with the Gujarat Pollution Control Board, which is the agency in Gujarat that's responsible for the enforcement of all environmental regulations. This is really a very strong collaboration we have had with the Gujarat Pollution Control Board from then. Now on, I'm going to say GPCB, for the last few years, to really, for the first time, I think, try to design better policies in collaboration with the regulator themselves. So, reducing pollution is a key concern in many developing economies. You can see a map of the world here with particulate matters, which is a form of pollution that's particularly bad for you. The redder the points, the worse. And you can see that the emerging economies have redder points. India is doing particularly badly in this context. That graph, that table, that's interesting. That was the most controversial table I had to show, and it went away. So I can still tell you what's in it, because I will not be silenced. I don't know why it went away from the slide. This is a WHO report that you've almost surely have heard about, listing cities by just citing in all the major cities in the world the ratio of PM 2.5 and PM 10, and ranking cities like that. If you take the PM 2.5, according to this ranking, India has the highest, the most polluted city. We are sitting in the auditorium, although it's probably better here because there is some green trees around us. And the second worst, and the third worst. I think the fourth one is Karachi, but it continues down the line. I think out of the 10 most polluted cities, according to this index, 7 or 8 of them are in India. So of course this was immediately disputed as irrelevant and not right calculations, etc. You can, and yes, whatever, one can dispute all one can, but it's also something that that better be addressed rather than disputed. There are reasons, there are large payoffs in terms of health, in fact, in terms of lives, of reducing ambient pollution. Large air pollutant concentrations have health consequences, including reduced life. So 2 examples, one of China, one in India, show that, so in China, this is simply comparing the level of pollution are much higher on one side of the river than on the other side. When you compare people who live on one side of the river compared to the other side, the people who live on the wrong side of the river have shorter lives. This is a paper by a bunch of people, including my co-authors Michael Greenstone in Science 2011. More relevant here is work from Michael Greenstone and Rima Hanna for India, where I'm going to cite this work again in a minute, but what they do is to look at, is compile all of the data that is available on pollution regulation in various states in India over time. So it's a big panel data set on efforts that were done to control pollution in various cities in India. As I'm going to show in a minute, this effort to reduce pollution had only limited effectiveness, but it had some effectiveness for air pollution. And what you can do then is trace out whether you have any impact on health outcomes. The most important, one of the most important health outcomes you might want to look at is infant mortality. And what they find is that despite the fact that these regulations were not all that effective and the reduction in pollution were not nearly as large as what was aimed for, they have an impact on reducing infant mortality. So there is a huge payoff in terms of lives saved. Then you can do, you can do cost-benefit analysis, whatever, but it seems to be that it's really a battle worth fighting, especially given the very, very high level that we are starting from in India. So why is India so polluted? So importantly, it's not because India doesn't have, at some very high level, at least on paper, the political will to do something about pollution. In other words, it's not because there are no policies in India that are meant to control pollution. In fact, India has a Water Act since 1974 and an Air Act since 1981. They might be, they are potentially a little bit on the line, according to recent political announcements. But they were basically modeled on the Clean Air Act of the US and on the Clean Water Act of the US. The law creates agencies that are in charge of enforcing regulations, the Central Pollution Control Board, and then states' counterpart. The states don't have the freedom to weaken the standards. They can only strengthen the standard if they choose to do so. Otherwise, it is their mandate to enforce those standards. The standards are in the form of maximum allowed concentration, and by forms, for example, maximum allowed pollution out of your drain, or maximum allowed emission out of your stacks. And those standards are very, very stringent. They are, in fact, pretty similar, sometimes even more stringent than the standard in the US. Yet the quality of the air is pretty similar, is pretty dissimilar, and one reason is that those policies are not adequately enforced. I'm going to show you some evidence from Gujarat showing that the plants are polluting orders of magnitudes above the allowed threshold. And that's more generally the case. So this paper by Greenstone and Hanna showed that the very strict and stricter environmental regulation in India have had very, very little bite. Basically no bite on water pollution whatsoever. There is no correlation between the standard that are being required and the actual level of water pollution. and not that much bite on air. On air, it's some pollutants and not others. For example, particulate matter seem to be unrelated to the on-paper regulation. So that suggests that if you want to do anything on the question of pollution in India, the battle is not at a philosophical level, because in some sense that battle has been fought and won. The battle is at the level of enforcement. Why is the enforcement so weak, and what can be done about it? And there, we are extremely fortunate that since 2008, we've had this excellent relationship with one of the pollution control board, Gujarat Pollution Control Board, which basically let us do work with them on exactly those issues. So we looked in particular at two policies. One is a policy of third-party audit system that they have had for a few years following a court mandate. I'll describe the system in a moment. But that system, when we arrived, was in disarray. It wasn't working whatsoever. So the first thing we did is try and fix it with them. And the second thing we did is work with them to increase the frequency of inspections, just regular command and control inspections, simply because the resources to carry these inspections are not there. So one of the problems is that you're supposed to inspect some farms 3 times a year and some other farms once a year, but the level of inspection is much less. So we worked with them on these 2 projects, and what I'm going to do today is to show you the results of that work. So why Gujarat? Well, Gujarat is pretty polluted. As this is a photo of that we took in Ahmedabad. Vapi is one of the 10th polluted small place on Earth, according to a Blackwater report. Ahmedabad is in that list of 10th most polluted city. Gujarat is an industrial state, as we all know now. It's been growing very fast. It's reasonably industry-friendly, or very industry-friendly. But at the same time, it has this, the counterpart has been this increase in pollution that they are really trying to do something about. So what can they do? So the Gujarat Pollution Control Board regulates about 20,000 plants throughout the states. The main tool is your basic command and control regulation system. There is mandates for maximum pollution concentration out of your chimney stacks or out of your water effluents for farms with and without common effluent treatment plants. And then there are inspection teams that are going out and collecting information regularly on what are your pollution. And they are powerful. They really have the abilities to impose penalties on farms, and they do. We see it in it's not just, they don't look away all the time. Sometimes you may have this impression, but they do impose these penalties. Penalties we see in our data set include the bonds against future performance, and the most frequent is costly penalties closure, which they can enforce because they have the ability of disconnecting the electricity of the water. And they go ahead and do it occasionally. So it's a powerful regulator. They have 2 ways for monitoring compliance to farm. One is this regulatory inspection, so they send their own teams from their own staff. And the other is a third-party audit system, which was introduced by the High Court several years ago in response to a lawsuit that argued that clearly the GPCB is not doing a good job enforcing the pollution regulation since the place is so polluted. So the answer of the court was to say, well, yes, but then GPCB doesn't really have enough teams and enough money, so under the principle that the polluters should pay, it's the farms, the plants that should be paying for getting monitored, and therefore they will have, in addition to the regular inspection, the firms that have the highest pollution potential, which are firms in sectors like dyes and chemical and stuff like that, will need to have an audit. The audit is, you're supposed to hire your own auditors. They're supposed to conduct 3 visits per year and to give a report to GPCB at the end of the day. Suppose this is a pretty operating word here, and we'll get back to that in a moment. So this collaboration, let me give you, it's not in the slides, but let me give you a little bit of inside story about how this whole came about. We were contacted by a lawyer that works for GPCB against the firms, usually when GPCB has lawsuits occasionally. We were contacted by these lawyers and to see whether we could kind of help them do something. And we proposed to them that let's try and find out what can be done, both to improve the third-party audit system. So when we arrived, the firms, the plants, were in the middle of suing the GPCB to require a stop of the third-party audit system. And there the interestingly ironical premise that the system is not used, it's not useful, it doesn't generate useful information, therefore it's just punishing taxation. So it was a little bit ironical that they agreed that they are perverted the system so much that it's useless and therefore they should stop paying for it, but there was some truth to that. And everybody kind of agreed with that. It's not that everybody knew it. So the idea was, can it be improved since it exists on paper? And we kind of had a chance to work with them. The second thing that they were interested in is, since they were so much understaffed, would it be possible to demonstrate the impact that being properly staffed at the level that allows them to carry the inspection at a standard rate would make a huge difference or not? So it was a pretty exciting project because it's not something that you do like to go ex post evaluating something that happens. It's really something that kind of you build and design together, and there is a lot of economics in it to think through the shortcomings of the current audit system, for example, and how it can be fixed. Like why is it bad? Like what are the problems with the incentives that the various actors are facing, and how can we try and fix it? So, as you might know, the way we work in JPAL, which is my lab here, and at MIT, is to conduct randomized control trials. So we allocate units. In this case, we are going to allocate plants randomly to different type of treatment. So some farms get get allocated to the control group. Some farms get allocated to the treatment group. This is decided randomly. So there is nothing that is systematically different between the farms to start with. And then, because you can really see whether changing, for example, the inspection frequency make a real difference in pollution, or whether changing some features of the audit system makes a difference in terms of pollution they are getting. So you would think that it's not a very easy proposition that you can randomize regulation, but then I have not yet seen something that I couldn't randomize. So we managed that too. It took a little bit of convincing. The first time that it occurred to me that we were randomizing regulations, I thought maybe someone's going to object, but no, it was fine, because in a sense the way we worked on that is to say, there's nothing we did for example, in the third-party audit system that was not within the confine of the existing law and the existing court order. So it was just a way of, let's pick a set of firms and apply it slightly differently. And within that context, you can do a lot of things. So let me start with the inspection work, because in a sense that's the kind of conceptually easier. So it's very simple. The inspections, how does the inspection work? The inspections are to gather information. They send a team of 2 people, an engineer and a scientist. They visit the plant, they observe what's going on in the plant, and they collect samples, samples of water and air emission. So they go to the stacks and collect some samples, they go to the effluent, collect some samples, they bring it to the lab, send it to the lab, analyze them for all of the nasty stuff you can find in those things. They record those findings in inspection reports that then goes into the plant file. The lab analyzes the report, and then the report is received by a regional officer who decides further action, which could be to do nothing because the form is compliant, or maybe not compliant but not worth fighting over, or to issue a citation, or to issue a warning, or to issue a closure notice. Typically, they're not going to start with the closure notice, but you have kind of basically a game between the firm and the regulator, starting with suppose I find some problem, so I will start by a letter, and then the firm will respond, or will maybe try to ignore me. So then I'll send a citation, and then the firms maybe try to ignore me again, then I'll send a warning, and then maybe a closure notice, and eventually they'll do something and clean up. So they have two ways to annoy the firms. They can close. They can also go to the court, although they do that very infrequently because it's very, 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 very long. There are different reasons why you could be inspected. Either it's a routine inspection to try and because firms, depending on their sector and their size, must be inspected, in principle must be inspected at some statutory rate. So they try to hit that. They don't hit that, but they hit about a third of that. So about a third of the inspections are random, more or less random. A third are to check that because the firm wants to do something, they want to expand, so then you need an inspection as part of the licensing change. And then you have follow-ups, so go back to the same firm that was polluting before. The plants are not at all inspected at the prescribed rate. They don't have the staff to do that. So in green, you have the number of days that you should have since the last inspection for a large firm, medium firm, and small firm in the red category. The red category is the industries that are the most polluted. So the large and medium red should be inspected every 90 days, and the small red should be inspected every year. And you see that it's about almost twice that for the small firm, and closer to twice to 3 times as that for the medium and large firms. So there is some scope to inspect more frequently. So what did we do? Well, we raised some money, quite a bunch of money, because inspections are not free, in order to provide GPCB with teams of extra manpower. What we did is there is a mandatory retirement age in GPCB, like in many parts of the civil service, and there were people who were very much willing to go back to work after having been retired for a year or two, hired them, combined them with existing staffs in order to create enough manpower to randomize to inspect at the statutory level. So we took a random half of the plant in several industrial clusters to be assigned to be inspected more often at the statutory rate. They were stratified by the other intervention, and then all treatment plants were assigned in the initial quarter, and then 2/3 of a chance of assignment to revisit in subsequent quarters. After 4 quarters, it was reset to be inspected again. So we did that for about 2 years, or a little less than 2 years, 3rd quarter of 2009 to the 1st quarter of 2011. And then we collected some data. So one thing that we have that's pretty interesting is administrative data on the interaction between the firms and the regulator. So basically we collected all of the correspondence that exists, is recorded between the firm and the team. So the letter and the firm's response and the response to the response and the response to the response, some of that is now computerized. Before, some of that is on paper. We collected everything, put everything together. So we have this giant game with many, many steps between the firm and the regulator. What I'm sparing you today is we have a structural analysis of that game, trying to see like how that game is being played. But I'll give you the main insight that comes out of this analysis. And then we have an independent endline survey, because we can't entirely rely on the data from the regulator, because it might itself be tainted in various ways. So we hired the local engineering college and get them to survey all of the firms in the treatment and the control at the end, find out some stuff about their production, their profits, their electricity bill, etc., and collect some information about any abatement, any investment they did to abate pollution, and other aspects of their plant life, any fines that they paid, etc., and most importantly, from this point of view, some information on pollution, the same type of information that are collected in those inspections. So we have our own independent measure of pollution. So the first thing that comes out of this analysis of the interactions between the regulator and the plant is that the Gujarat Pollution Control Board is not sitting there and waiting to see how firms are doing. They are quite active. In 20% of the case, they mandate equipment installation. 20% of the case, they issue some sort of a citation for violation. They do disconnect the utility, which is pretty costly, 7% of the time, and then about 2% of the time require a posting of a bank guarantee. So they do act. Then did our experiment work? You would find out that potentially Gujarat Pollution Control Board could have taken our resources and then immediately taken people away from our treatment and put it in the control. That was not the name of the game, since the idea was to demonstrate the impact of inspections, and in fact they didn't do it, so that's nice. So you can see that from the third quarter of 2001 till the first quarter of 2011, we have many more inspections in the treatment group than in the control group, so that's good. So we had, basically the mass of inspection, where you see we have fewer firms that have 0 inspection and more that has 2 to 3 to 4. So we get much, much closer to what is expected under the law. So you can have an idea of the treatment group, gives you an idea of the best case scenario in terms of what the inspection can do. So what did that lead to anything? So yes, it did too. So the firms were inspected more frequently. As a result, they were cited more frequently. You can see on the right, the bars are the difference between treatment and control. So they were cited more frequently. They received more warnings. They received more closure direction. But after that, they received the very costly thing didn't increase that much. So it could be because they had cleaned up, because they were scared of the citation, the closure warnings, and the closure direction, so the plants cleaned up their act and there was no need to go and close them. That would be the nice story. So we can find that out because we have the pollution at the end of we have our independent measure of pollution. And this is basically the upshot of the results there. This is a difference between treatment and control in terms of the fraction of firms that are compliant with the standards and the actual level of pollution. That's an index of all of the pollutions taken together. The bar is for significant levels. So what you can see is that they are somewhat more likely to be compliant, actually. So we do increase the fraction of firms that are compliant. So that complies to the very, very strict standards. However, although pollution does decrease by about 0.10 of a standard deviation, that's not a very large effect. For people who are not familiar with working on standard deviation, just trust my word. It's not a very large effect. And more importantly, in a sense, it's not significantly different from 0. So we can't tell that there was any effect. The point estimate is negative. It goes in the right direction, but it's not very big, and it's not significant, so it could have been 0. We don't know. So how come you have some impact on compliance but no impact on pollution? Well, the reason why this is the case is that the effect on compliance is driven by people who are just about to be compliant. So what we have is you can see here where the mass of farms was shifted. And you can see the big vertical line here is the line that says that you're compliant. And what we can see is that we have less farms that are almost compliant and more farms that are just compliant. So we have more farms, that big line over there. Maybe there is a thing. No. The big line that's on the left of the threshold, that's the farms that were taken from the right and come to the left. So farms that are just, for which it's not so much effort, have moved. That's nice, but you get nothing from the very big guys. This is an intervention that shifted very marginal farms. The thresholds are a little bit pie in the sky. They are so strict that in any case, very few people comply. And at some level, that's not the people who are compliant plus epsilon. They are not responsible for the fact that Delhi is the most polluted city in the world. That's neither here nor there. The important ones are way to the right, and those were completely unaffected by our little inspection intervention. So how come that's the case? So let me summarize the result, and then I'll provide you some intervention. So first of all, the treatment was carried out well. The treatment plants were inspected more. There was more regulation, more violation, the treatment plants were they entered this conveyor belt where they got, it seems that they got the standard treatment of any farms that is found to be non-compliant, but they were not subject to more costly penalty. There is an existing but weak compliance response. So what's the interpretation? So there's various interpretations you could say. One says that, well, there was no interest in going after the big guys, so even if one was identified, they were ignored. But actually, the way we can look at that by looking at these interactions between this big game that is being played between the farm and the regulator. And what we find is that in the absence of our inspection reports, many more of the farms that are inspected get really harassed. The farms that were brought in by our treatment, which are randomly selected farms, most of them are let go. So think about like the regulator having his big fishing nets. What this result suggests is that they sort of know where to find the good fish. And what we told them is fish anywhere in the sea and see what comes out of it. Most of the fish is not particularly big. They just let it go. The big fish they knew where to find. Maybe there is some that they are not very interested in finding. That's possible they left aside. The point is that they were doing a reasonably good job already at using their limited resources to go after the people they wanted to go to. So what we offer, which is what the law would offer if it was followed regularly, is more information on a random set of farms. At some level, that information is not particularly useful. So that suggests that there is some value in leaving some discretion to the regulator. They don't need to be told you need to go one by one. This is the context. This is this particular context in Gujarat. That might be different in other places, but here there is some value in regulatory discretion, it seems to be. So the way it's summarized is if you can use our game to say, what's the cost of an inspection to the farm? And the average cost of being inspected in general in the status quo is, in terms of the expected penalty you might get, is much, much larger than in a treatment. Treatment got a lot of inspection that are just, a one-shot interaction and it goes away because the effect is not that large. So that's for the first experiment. The second thing we did, actually, we did it together, so it's not chronologically, not the second one, we did at the same time, is looking at this market for environmental audits. Fascinating market. What's an audit? Well, you have to hire a firm in Gujarat that are in this highly polluting category, has to hire a team of auditors. They have to visit 3 times a year, collect pollution readings, concentration for 8 air and water pollution, observe practices, provide advice, and provide information to the regulator, who can then use it in the same way that they use their own inspection. So in principle, it provides information 3 times a year for the universe of the most polluting farms. So that, if the information was useful, means that the regulator could get everybody, all the fish, good, small, etc. And so therefore, they could go after the big guys identified in this way. So it could potentially be quite useful. The consequences of audits are real. If you don't submit, you're punishable. If your audits are very bad, it can be the same thing as for a bad inspection. In principle, false audits are punished, although you will see in a minute that doesn't seem to be a huge deal. The problem with the system is that it's a system which has a fundamental problem of conflict of interest, because it's the plant that is paying for the auditing. And the auditor's interest may not be perfectly aligned with the interest of the public to report the true pollution. Nobody is stupid here, so it's not that they didn't know that. And there is some safeguard, which is a very standard safeguard in this industry of auditing, whatever the sector. The audit team must have 4 people of different degrees. You cannot have anybody. The auditors cannot consult and audit for the same plant, same thing as in the US for financial audits. The rotation is mandated every 3 years. You can't keep the same auditors. But those were on paper, but in practice, only one was implemented, because that's easy to implement. The audit, when we started the project, as I mentioned, it was obvious to everybody that the audit quality was poor. The regulator was almost never using the findings. The good auditors had left the market. The good firms were saying, we're not interested in doing auditing, we prefer to do only consulting. Auditing is just terrible. A bunch of firms had sprung up, like little cottage industry of auditing. Esther auditing firms will have this one team and audits, so you have like a dime a dozen of auditors. And then, as I mentioned, the regulated plant was actually sued to end audit because they were not useful. Something that suggested to us that there was an issue other than all that is that the price of an audit was a fraction of the cost of doing the lab measurement if you do it at the cheapest rate possible. So that suggests that lab measurement could not have been made and the auditors making money. And in fact, it was probably the case. So this was some people were aware of that. Here some auditors may not necessarily want to tell it as they see it, lest they lose the engagement. So the auditors are more liable to the firm, to the plant, or something that Jayam Ramesh mentioned apropos the environmental impact assessment, which is something you need to do before you start a firm. The person who is putting up the project is preparing the report. So this is not something that is unique to India or unique to the environment sector. This fundamental conflict of interest between third-party auditors and the firm they regulate is something that was very much everywhere in the press when we started working on this project in 2008, because it came in the context of the financial crisis in the US. Post-2008, it was finally realized that the ratings are completely inaccurate. 80% of the CDOs, which were rated AAA by Standard & Poor's, were downgraded. Before that and after that, there have been major accounting scandals, Satyam Computer from here, Enron, WorldCom, Tyco, etc. And the former SSE chairman actually proposed that for financial audit, there should be a system very similar to the one we proposed here, which I'll describe in a moment. So this is something that is kind of in the air. I don't know what's that, but it's not mine. So this was very much talked about, but it's very difficult to measure the impact of this market structure on reporting, because how do you know audit quality? It's kind of how you need to compare it to a counterfactual. In most sectors, it's hard to get. And basically, all audit markets are set up in the same way that the firms hired the auditors, so there is no benchmark comparison. So this is where this project is relatively unique to give us a sense of how, not only for environment, but in general, how could you restructure an audit market to make it work? So we were pretty much inspired both by the economics of it and by the SEC chairman's recommendation. We proposed a 4-component treatment. One is that the firm shouldn't pick the auditor. The society should pick the auditor. So basically now all the firms are paying into a pool, and the auditor belongs to a pool, and the auditor is randomly assigned to the firm. In our case, the re-randomized every year. It could be, if it was much more complicated, you could keep the relationship for a number of years, but set. So now the auditor is not anymore responsible to the firm, they're responsible to the pool. That should give them incentive to be accurate. Another incentive is financial independence. So instead of being paid by the firm directly, they're paid by the pool. The firm pays into the pool pays to the firm. So there is no direct financial relationship. There might be under the table payments, but at least the prima facie, there is no direct financial relationship. Third of all, now the auditors have incentive to be accurate, to report to the pool. You need to check that they are doing good work. You're interested in checking accuracy. So we monitor the auditors with regular back checks, occasional back checks. And finally, in the second year, so in principle, just staying into the pool provides enough incentives, but then we also provided financial incentive in the form of higher payment from our accurate auditors. So that was that. And then, so we took a bunch of firms and we said, well, welcome, you're in this brave new world. The reason we could do that is that all of these provisions are in the High Court, are in the court order. They happen to not have been implemented, or at least they could be, we could stretch a little bit the language to make that possible. So the firms were not necessarily very happy with this new thing, but that's what it was. So how did it work? So we randomized the firms, eligible firms, for firms that were eligible for audits into treatment and control, audit reform versus status quo for 2 years. Then in the middle of year 2, we measured audit quality, and after the end of that, we measured pollution at all plants. Same survey that we use for inspection. One stone, 2 birds. It's an expensive stone, so we kind of wanted to use it as much as possible. So anybody in this industry who wanted to play was included. Auditors were allowed to work in treatment and control group. So what is pretty interesting is we have many auditors who are working with treatment firms and with control firms. So it's the same auditors, companies, under 2 different incentives. We can see whether their behavior is different depending on what incentives they face. What do we know? We know what the auditors reported. We know what the back checks were. So a couple of weeks usually after or several weeks after the visit by the auditors, we went to the same plant, measured the same pollutants. And then we have our survey of final pollution outcomes. So these are the pollution that we look at. Water pollutants are BOD, COD, TDS, TSS, and NH3 and N. Air pollutants are SO2, NOx, and SPM, which are kind of the most important one. Let's look at the results. So the first one is to establish that the reporting was indeed corrupt under the status quo. So this is what the audit report. In red, you have the standard. This is for one particular one, but this is suspended particular matters. you could do it for any pollutant. And you can see that it's looking pretty good. All of the forms are below the threshold, usually just below the threshold. That's nice. I'd say it would be nice if it were the truth. Compared to the back checks, that's the back check. So the audits are like a little bit not great. What is interesting is you can see that there is a bunch of firms that are actually polluting significantly less than they are reported in the audits. That's because the audits are not carried out whatsoever. I mean, if you're going to, why make up the results? Why bother collecting the data if you're going to make up the results anyway? It's much cheaper to just write it down. You can offer a better price and everybody is happy. But of course, most of the mass comes from the right side of the distribution. So that's the bad news. The good news is that it's fixable. Our little treatment, this is the audit in our little treatment. Remember how the audits in the control look like? That's the audit in the treatment. It's not quite the truth, but it's very close. And for a bunch of, if you take all the pollution together, in many cases we can hardly distinguish the behavior of the auditors under the treatment and the new system, and the auditors and the back checks. So it worked out. What is very striking is that is true even if you restrict the sample to auditors who work in both sample and you look at the behavior of the same guys in the treatment versus the control. So it's not a selection effect. It's not that the good guys came to work with the new system. It's the same guys who are behaving differently depending on which way their bread is buttered. That's kind of, again, summarizing this effect. This is the difference between this is the audit treatment effect, the difference between what the auditors report in the treatment and the control. So basically there is this huge decrease in the number of firms that are reported to pollute exactly below the threshold. And it's mostly coming from increasing the right, but a little bit increasing the left as well. Just a different way of finding the same result. Then you could say, well, does it matter? After all, the inspection also gave more data on pollution, but here it's the universe of farms the universe of polluting farms 3 times a year, so it could have had a bigger impact on pollution. And it did. There is, in this case, a significant reduction in the number in average pollution by farms, according to our end line. So even though they are reported to be much more polluted by the audit, they are actually less polluted by the true measurement. And the effect comes entirely for the top tail. So it's very different from the inspection, which brought in some guys who were kind of irrelevant. Here we bring in everybody. The information is now trusted, so they can go and say, well, we are going to focus only on the people where we are going to go where we have potentially the most impact. So basically, GPCB went against the very big guys that were previously didn't have very good measurement, forced them to do something about that. So following that, since then we've been negotiating with Gujarat Pollution Control Board to make this change in the system permanent, and they are still interested in it. It's moving its way, it's going to the court, etc. But I'm still very hopeful that it's going to be adopted. Randomly assign the auditors to plant. Regulator sets the fee for an audit. The firms are not free to pay under market, for example. And the monitor auditors reporting through back checks by independent firms. So that's a system that they are working on. It's working its way through the system to be hopefully adopted. So what's our conclusion? Well, in a sense, at a broadly methodological level, is you can go into systems that doesn't work very, very well, work with the people in charge of making it work. It's plumbing in a sense, but it's pretty important plumbing. You can make it work better. So that doesn't mean, by the way, that third-party audits that I would recommend people who don't have states that don't have a third-party audit system to implement one. I don't know, because I have not compared the third-party a situation where there is a third-party audit system to a situation where there is no third-party audit system. So I don't have an answer to that question. All I know is if you're going to have a third-party audit system, this is a structure it should have. And if it doesn't, you're likely to hit big conflict of interest problem. We did a cost-benefit analysis of this audit reform. So inspecting the firms more often costs money. And then it costs money to the firm to clean up. But under any reasonable valuation of the life saved, this is something that would probably be worth it. However, it is, and that's an agenda more for future research, it's worth pointing out that most of the cost of the regulation enforcement to firms don't come from the cost of inspecting new abatement, they come from closure. So the reason why when we estimate this game, the cost of regulation don't come from what you have to do to avoid it, comes from the fact you might be closed for 2 weeks in the middle or something like that. So basically the next, in some sense, the avenue for future reform is how do you regulate while avoiding this type of, do you have a way to put pressure on the firms that's a different way than to close them down, which might impose 2 weeks of lost revenue, which is pure deadweight loss. Nobody benefits from that. So that will, dramatically change the calculation in terms of whether it's probably already worth it, but there is a lot of deadweight loss in the regulation today. And if, in a sense, attacking that problem, how do you improve the interactions with the firm such that they clean up before you have to close them down, would be a promising avenue for further research and future reform. Finally, this is about pollution, which is important in and of itself. But of course, this will all become even more pertinent, even when there is a real effort and real willingness to do something against climate change. Because what will it look like? Well, it will look like some agreement to emit less CO2. It will require some ways to enforce this agreement. I've been looking in sense starting with inspection. This is the most common and control, and then introducing some market with the third-party audits. Of course, the next big ticket item is the trading schemes. My co-authors are involved in piloting a system that's about emission trading schemes, so we'll see where that goes. But that's kind of, in a sense, the next frontier, both in terms of the collaboration with the policymakers here and in terms of the policy that you can think about further and further away from command and control. So I'm going to stop here. Thank you very much for your attention.